All right, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back. You're currently tuning in for the Asian Goalie Show. I'm your host, Felix. I'm also known as the Asian Goalie. The mission of the show is to create the most impactful platform for BLE goalies to learn, share, and collaborate. This Twitch channel is the one and only live channel where I collaborate with others and have live interactions with all of you. If you don't want to miss any future live experience, consider clicking on the follow button. And if you're watching this from YouTube, don't forget to click on subscribe button if you haven't done so. So, we are stepping into the second episode of the month where we continue to deep dive into the mental game we all play as beer league goalies. Ice hockey has given me a way to really understand myself more, and in a way that I would never expect to when I first started. And every critical moments of each game creates a chance for me to reflect and understand how and why I reacted in a certain way. And they are learning lessons for me to be a better goalie, better teammates, and more importantly, a better human on and off the ice. In today's episode, I have our guest Madeleine to share her own lessons from playing the sports and how she has been using her goalie mind to overcome different tough life situations. So before I invite her to the show, I want to make sure that everybody is aware of this and ask me anything environment. So if you have any questions, comments, suggestions to me or Madeleine, please do comment in the chat and let us know. So let's get the show started. Madeleine, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hello, great. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for volunteering. You were one of the volunteers. Just raise my hand. I'm like, when I post something in lift the mask group, as we invited Justin here last time, Madeleine was the first one to respond saying like, yes, let's do it. We'll have something to share. She's an open book. Very, very appreciative. A little bit background about Madeleine actually. She has growing up a lot, playing a lot of different sports. So I think the first question I would like to know more is, can you tell us more about your background in like different sports that you've played?
Yeah. I started, playing co-ed soccer when I was a little kid, kind of my earliest memories.
Yeah.
And then when I was in elementary school, I started playing ringette. I wanted to play hockey. I couldn't skate, and my friends were like, "Come join ringette." So I joined them, and I fell in love with the ice. And then eventually I was like, okay, I want us to start hockey. And I was supposed to switch to hockey. But somehow I was able to convince my parents to let me play both. And, through all of this, I've always been a goalie. My memories as, a 5-year-old is playing in net. So something's always been wired in my brain to do that.
Yeah.
And then I was asked by friends when I was about grade 8. They said, "Hey, we don't have a goalie for field hockey." And I was like, "Hey, goalie, same thing. It's my off season." So I joined that and ended up playing on the regional and provincial team that year. So by high school, I was playing ringette, field hockey, and ice hockey competitively. But sometimes I joke that I play goalie and I just happen to do that within sports. So it doesn't really
Mm,
matter. It's a handball tournament. I'm playing in net. I'm happy.
that is really interesting. Do you think you were born the way you like when you first started playing goalie? Do you just like naturally, oh, this is my position, or you you were like play around different things, or you found that?
I think part of it was I hated running. So that may have, I think I was too young to know that, but I think playing soccer, I was like, this is so much better. But
Mm,
yeah, I don't know. There's just always been something I've been really drawn to the position. And, we'll go into it. And I think part of it mentally is I've always been able to process kind of the stressors and the demands of the position.
ring it and ice hockey. I saw the only time I saw people playing Ring on ice or on live was I was preparing my next game and I saw the ice time before me was some ladies playing some Ring. Walk me through a little bit of what are the main difference being a goalie on the Ring versus ice. Is it pretty much the same, or what do you think? What's the main difference?
It really is like two different sports.
Is it?
And I'll say, I know we're here for beer league hockey, but I
Yeah.
would take Ringette over it. It's from a young age because the players can't enter the crease. You can't just throw the ring at the net and crash the net like you would in hockey.
Oh.
So from a young age, they're taught, okay, you have to pick the corners, you have to move, you actually have to, shoot to score instead of
Hmm.
shoot for a rebound. And because of the way you can only have three people, all the hockey players, like, what are all these lines on the ice? So you have the line on top of the face-off circle. You can only have three people from each team. So there's constant cycling. So it's very similar to basketball or lacrosse. So there's so much more movement as a goalie. And it's, drop passes, all these things. So I'm having to be a lot more aware of where all the different people are and just kind of really forced to work on my skating as well.
Very interesting. So, how did you get in touch with all these different sports? Like, do you just run to it and just start playing it, or was it influenced by your school? Like, how did you get into all these sports that you have?
Um, I just have always been, kind of athletic, and I wanted to play hockey. And I think part of that, Vancouver Canucks, kind of growing up
Yeah.
in a hockey town. And I just happened to have classmates who played ringette, and they're like, "Hey, come join us instead." I was like, "All right, sure, get me on the ice, I'll take it." And then I just kind of added on hockey because I was originally wanted what I wanted to do, and then field hockey just happened because they needed a goalie, and they kind of figured if you play goalie in one sport, maybe this will work as well, and it happened too.
You mentioned one word. You're very athletic to begin with. From my end, the way I see athlete, I think they have a very unique way of thinking, and I want to hear from you on this one. Do you see yourself as an extrovert or an introvert when it
Um,
comes to you being a person?
I'd say I'm more of an introvert, in the sense of, I need that alone time and my own space to kind of recharge. And
Yeah.
it can be really exhausting sometimes to constantly be out with people and having to do that. But I am comfortable, engaging. I'm happy to be. I do some public speaking, so I am comfortable talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm definitely, I need to have that time alone.
Were you always like this, or before when you were young, when you're athletic, are you always that guy? Like, oh, sorry, that person who are always love public speaking, or you're okay with public speaking, or you it kind of train yourself onto that?
Um, I wouldn't say I loved it. I did French immersion growing up. So
Yeah.
starting in grade 4, every year we had to do a speech in French. And
Oh, I
so
see.
kind of got thrown into it at quite a young age, even if it's just that 4 minute, 5 minute speech.
Yeah.
So I think, even that was helpful. Um, and I know I didn't like it, but I was always able to do it.
Yeah. So the reason why I brought this question up, you might be feel like, why is Felix asking me this question so early? But I'll bring it up. I'll bring this up and connect it again. But what I'm thinking is, I actually found start to find a little bit of a common thing when I'm talking about mental health issues. It kind of linked to a lot of people. Like, I rarely have someone that I know who are super extrovert that that are willing to talk about mental health, but it's always the introverts who love to talk about these kind of things. And a lot of people I interview, they are tend to be more introvert side of things. But I start to find a little trend on this, which I found very interesting. So I'm a personally a introvert myself as well, and I think it's sometimes it's a lot of the mental battle that we have in our head that actually help us evolve in this mental game, and we're willing to talk about it, which is interesting. But let's keep that in mind. The next thing I want to talk about is one of the thing that I really appreciate that you love, that you want to share, because I think this would connect to our main topics, which is the mental game we play, very well. So you had a car accident that happened a while back, and can you tell us kind of when that happened, after that, how that has changed your life, and how have you impacted your life?
Yeah, so I was in a car accident in November of 2014, and I was driving back home to Toronto from a work event, and it was a Saturday night, end of November, and I lost control, and I can still remember I crossed the three lanes, went off the shoulder. There's a bit of a hill, which just kind of acted like a ramp, and I went up and broke one tree in half, about 7 feet in the air, before eventually landing on the roof into a second tree about 30 feet down the road. And so I was conscious for about an hour, unconscious for an hour, and then probably took another 30-40 minutes before I was able to get myself out of my seatbelt, extricate myself from the car, and make my way to the shoulder. And with it being Saturday winter night, it was dark, and it was a kind of quiet stretch of the highway, so no one saw me crash. No one could see me from the road, so I was kind of stuck there on my own until I managed to get myself out. I ended up in hospital for 11 days, and I had 3 broken ribs, fractured scapula, and a collapsed lung. So I had surgery to plate 2 of those ribs, so I got a little bit of titanium in me now. And then, those physical injuries healed up pretty well. But a few months later, I was diagnosed with PTSD as a result of the accident. And that's kind of been the biggest and hardest kind of diagnoses and obstacle for me to face. So it took me a while. I had to take time away from school, and even now there's lasting impacts from that.
Tell us how. I think what really amazed me when I heard that story is how you were able to process the fact that, hey, no one's gonna rescue me if I don't get myself out of that situation. At that time, what comes into your mind when you were stuck in the car for 2 hours and you were trying to get out of it? What comes into mind? Like, is it something along those lines of, I gotta get out of it, or you were just not sure what to do? And how do you overcome it?
Yeah, when I called my family after the accident, my explanation, I was like, I went into what I call my goalie mind. And so that's a mindset I developed quite young, and I think that's part of the reason why I've always been able to do well as a goalie. It's not uncommon. You're at a tournament or something, and you see that young goalie crying on the ice. The score is 7-1. They're losing, and that I never had that experience as a young kid. It would happen. I'd be like, okay, well, next shot, and I was able to keep a pretty kind of level head. And Justin mentioned this, how important it is for a goalie's success to be able to keep that level head during the game. And so I really had it practiced where I don't want to get too excited if the team scores, and I don't want to get too down if I get scored on. And so when I crashed, the moment the car came to a stop, there was an understandable level of panic and kind of yelling and just overwhelmed. But very quickly it was, okay, this emotion, all of this isn't going to help me. I need to bring myself down. I need to ground myself back and rationally think about the situation that I'm in. And then I'm studying kinesiology at school. So I also kind of have this medical
Mm.
perspective, if you want to say. So when I landed, it was like, okay, check all of my limbs. How am I? Can I move? Can I feel things? So I kind of did this body scan and stuff. And when I moved, I could feel my ribs on my left side. I was like, okay, something like I'm pretty sure something's broken here. It
Yeah.
was so painful.
Right.
But in my mind, it went, okay, if my ribs are like fully broken, I don't want to move too much because that could puncture my lung or something. And I said this, my mom's like, that's what went through your head in that moment. And I'm like, yeah, like I went to my toolbox of knowledge that I had, and I
Yeah.
just calmly and rationally kind of processed it all. And so, I really went back to that goalie mind to ground myself. I took out my watch so I could track and have an idea of kind of my timeline. And that really helped me process the situation. And so, even though I ended up with PTSD from the accident, I really think that goalie mind, without it, it would have been a lot worse. Um, because there's kind of a few moments that developed into the flashbacks and kind of
Mm.
brought up the most distress for me. But because I was able to ground myself and go back to the skills I had developed through being a goalie and through sports, there's a lot of, the majority of it when I went back and processed it in therapy, most of the time, it didn't cause that panic when I went back because I was calm and kind of accepting in that moment.
Yeah. I I think the goalie mind in my understanding from what you say is really giving us the logical part and the fact part of our brain up to say like, hey, emotion, something that come into your mind, it will come. Like that part is it's a lot harder to control, but when you have the logical side of things giving us a different perspective, hey, is actually not too bad. We only hear like I mean, I'm just saying we're only here for 2 hours. Like it's not too bad. You're still movable. You can still walk there and actually do that. Connecting that back to the game and back to other part of our life, I just realized like I said in the intro, it's like a lot of how I react in the game. It's really a direct reflection of how I react to any life situations that I've had. So, I from my point of view, from your story to me, what inspires me a lot is that there's not really hard moment. There's only the hard conversation you have to have with yourself. And I'm so glad that you had that in that moment so that you can get yourself out of that situation and get yourself, I would say, get your life back because of it. Would you agree?
Yeah. And I think sometimes when we're talking about, I think especially in beer league, because you could
Mm,
have, you know, just even Justin mentioned this, where, half your team doesn't show up for that one player. All right, you've had maybe, let's have the beers after the game, not beforehand.
right,
So,
right.
we're coming in, we can't always, as much as we want to win, that isn't always going to be possible and even outside of our hands. And so often, the focus is, did you do everything you could do to have success? And, if you put everything into it, sometimes you're going to lose, and that's okay. That's part of the game. And so it took me a while to kind of associate that mentality and mindset with it towards the accident. It was something that I was able to process again in therapy. And
Mm,
I was able to feel a sense of control in a situation that was very much outside of my control. And that helped with the PTSD. So when I kind of, like, going back, I had kind of three moments that became flashbacks and caused the most distress for me. And the first one was losing control, and I can see myself crossing the three lanes. I can see myself going off the shoulder in the air brake, deploying. But when I was talking about it, I was like, the thing that went through my head was, hold tight on the steering wheel and don't slam on the brakes. And that was something I had learned, I don't know how many years ago. I think it was like Canada's Worst Driver or whatever that TV show was. It was like the
Yeah.
random tips they give. And
Yeah.
so as soon as I lost control, that's immediately what went through my head. And that's, to cross 3 lanes is not a long time. That's a split second.
Yeah.
And, being able to think rationally like that, the way I look at it, comparing it to hockey is when your defender throws that puck up the middle to clear it and gives that giveaway right in the slot. And suddenly,
Yeah.
you have to pull from your toolbox, what save selection am I going to do to make this and respond? Yes. And being able to have that mentality as opposed to panic was, it's like, okay, I did everything I could in that moment to minimize the risk of the situation. And then when I think back, to the moments of panic, I reacted, I calmed myself, and I managed the situation as best I could. I minimized the movement on my ribs. The seatbelt was cutting off circulation to my right leg, so I purposely, would shift back and forth to make sure I was getting circulation between both of my legs. Again, my mom's like, how did you think about that? Like, that's, again, that's what went through your head. I'm like, yes. Yeah, because it doesn't matter if we're in overtime of the championship game and the other team has a 2-man advantage. And there's just layers of adrenaline and stress. As a goalie, you have to be that grounding force in your team. You have to calm yourself. You have to calm your teammates and just rely on your training and your experience to do everything you can to be as successful in that situation. And that's exactly what I did.
Two things I got out of what you just said there. One is, one thing that stuck in my head. I'm gonna replay this recording myself. I'm gonna get that quote again. You basically said one thing. You said the key to grab a little bit of control out of all the uncontrollable situation. That is so well said. I like that, because that's exactly what we do. It's like there's so many things in our life, in our games, in our any part. It's just uncontrollable. But how we can see that as, oh yeah, it just happened all the time. But how can you grab a little bit, just tiny bit of control, what you can do about it? That mindset change, that's, to me, is one of the core thing of what the goalie mind is about. I really like that. Number two I got from this is, I like how you see, I think I also have this mindset in my games nowadays. Not so much when I first started, but now it's knowing that responsibility of, you are the one who's holding the ground. We are the one who is holding the ground. No matter if it's overtime, anything, it's us, up to us to, hey, everybody's panic, doesn't matter. I'm the one who is calm. I'm gonna tell everybody, like, no matter what happened to the game, I'm gonna show up. I'm gonna show up for you, right? That to me is like so good. Like, that's another key component of the goalie mind. I'm gonna like write that in a book or something. Like, just like the two things, how to define goalie mind. That's the two right there.
Yeah. It's and actually, a lot of these things that I developed through sports, even beyond the goalie mind, are things that came up later when I was doing therapy and different types of therapy, like CBT, DBT, all these things. I'm like, oh, I learned that. Mindfulness. Oh yeah, that's what we covered. Oh, these breathing techniques. Yeah, we did that with my team. Or communication. I'm like, well, I know how to calm myself, communicate effectively with the ref, because it does no use to yell at them when you're pissed off. That's just going to end up with more calls against your team. You learn these things, and I'm like, oh, I've already done this. Now it's like, okay, how do I apply that in off the ice, and explore those things? And also, it's kind of like, okay, I actually kind of can handle a lot more than I may realize.
I want to ask you this question, kind of going back a little bit of the game side of things. What are some of the ways, like practical ways, that you have, like, you have joined so many different tournaments, but in situation like it's like a critical game, championship game, is there any like trick that you do with your mind that go like whenever you feel a little bit overwhelmed, like just do this, then you like neutralize that kind of feeling? What's your kind of habit towards that?
Uh, well, I'll start with anytime, and I'm trying to think. I would have been, this would have been maybe grade 7, so I was quite young, and I don't even know why, or like maybe where I learned this. But I have a routine that I still stick with
Yeah.
after any goal is scored. So whether my team scored or I got scored on, I do this to kind of ground myself and keep that level head. And
Yeah.
so I just tap the my shaft against the crossbar and
Okay.
tap the ice and do that twice. And then I go and I kind of squat down at the top of the crease. And that's my cue of reset. We're just focused on the next play. We're focused on the next puck drop. And so I do that, and I'll do that, even a face off in our end. I tap either my shaft or my glove against the post and set up for the face off. So I've developed and practiced these little physical routines that kind of cue my mind. And so it's kind of similar when you're in that overtime situation
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
is, it's a face off. I tap the post like I always will,
Yeah.
and I reset. And I think that's really important. And it ties into therapy, though. So you can be taught a coping mechanism, but it's not, going to help you when you're at a 10 right away. You really need to practice those things at lower intensity levels. So
Mm.
I practice that mental reset and that routine in practice or in just a beer league game kind of situation. And then when you end up in that championship, your brain is wired and it works.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how I was able to get to a point that I can reset and focus and be that calming factor for my team in, overtime in a final.
What about like life situation? Do you have your own cue? Like you can tap the ice or you can tap the post, right? Like is there anything that you do when you feel overwhelmed, you kind of tell yourself like, hey, don't feel that way.
Yeah, I kind of go internal and into myself, and I'll focus on a breath, and I can kind of just feel myself settle and sink. And it's kind of actually similar to the feeling when I tap and when I squat down at the top of the crease. There's this sense of just, I'm here and I'm ready and I'm,
Mm.
present in what is happening now
Yeah.
and forgetting what happened in the past and not, panicking that, we're down by a goal and we need to get ahead. It's, I'm here and I'm now. So I've gone to the point that I can be in different situations in my life and be able to pause and take that breath and quite quickly just settle so I can take it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think practicing breathing it's one of the most underrated thing. To me, I learned a lot over the year because I do find that locking myself in the room and not really like exercising myself, I was really like my mind started to go very clogged and like all these kind of weird thoughts that's going on. And breathing is a very nice practice to have to calm myself down and stay present. Right? A lot of people say breathing is a way to stay present, and when you do that, it's a way to calm us down, bring us back to the like what we need to focus on. And I very much agree with it, and thank you for sharing that. I want to talk about in terms of the goalie mind, right? Like I think one of the key thing that we talk about goalie mind that have benefit is it allows us to stay present, to think about what we can do. But I think there's also covering a lot of the emotional side of things because that part it comes naturally. But if you just push it aside and just stay logical for too long, you will realize that hey, those emotions never left. It's still in you. What are some of the things that what are the flip side of always using that mindset in life? What are some of the things that we have to think about when it comes to that?
Yeah. So like I said, since I was young, that's kind of been a mentality I've been able to, naturally kind of grow. And so for so long, this idea of this all or nothing kind of goalie mind, that if I feel emotions, I'll get overwhelmed, I'll be unfocused, I'll be out of the zone, I'll let in a goal, we'll lose.
Mm,
There's this kind of black and white thinking of that is what's going to happen. Is this belief around the goalie mind that
right.
if I feel those emotions and engage, we're going to lose. That domino effect, and that I have. And so, I would push away the emotions, whether it was the celebrating after we score or processing, when we would lose. And in a season, I wouldn't let myself engage with those emotions until the end, or the tournament, until the championship, because where it's you need to focus on the next shot, we need to focus on the next game, win or lose, we focus on the next game, we keep going. But that kind of sets you up for when that final happens to either be elated you won, or come crashing with all of the negative emotions of losing and everything that's kind of led up to that point.
Right.
And so I realized that mentality also kind of came into my life off the ice, and this belief that if I engage with these emotions, I'm going to feel out of control. And that was really tied with the trauma, that if I let myself feel these things, that panic and that overwhelmed I had during the accident, during those moments, is going to come up in my everyday life. And if I let that happen, then I'm going to feel out of control. I'm going to be overwhelmed. I'm not going to be focused. And, with school, I'm not going to be able to get my schoolwork done, and I'm going to have to drop classes again.
Mm-hmm.
So again, there's just this kind of catastrophizing domino effect. But then if you're not feeling those emotions, you're missing out on a large part of hockey, a large part of life.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to be able to kind of find a way to regulate those emotions and feel them. And so, I don't think I'll ever be, like a goalie like Marc-Andre Fleury, where he's, we love watching him joke around all game long, just having the time of his life. And it just seems like he loves what he's doing. I don't think I can ever be able to focus in a game and be that carefree.
Mm-hmm.
But I have really been trying to, be a little looser when I play,
Yeah.
and, celebrate a little more with my team, and things like that. And, the only reason I can do that is I've done a lot of work in therapy around doing kind of that same thing in my everyday life, and be like, okay, I can feel these things, and I'm not going to, get so overwhelmed that things in my life are going to be, negatively impacted.
When these kind of overwhelming things that's come into our life, I want to hear your thoughts. I have my own way of dealing with those, but how do you let your emotions go away like flow properly, right? Because sometimes I think I use, like, when I'm younger, I just ignore it. Like, I just don't think about it and just like, oh, here's what I can do. I just do that. I think my experience with my mom passing away, that's one thing that is a very good example. But I want to hear from you first. When a very overwhelming situation or something that makes you feel like chill, like, oh, something, I need to do something about it. How do you deal with that and make sure you let that emotional flow properly?
Um, for a while, I didn't. I'm still hesitant, if we're going to be honest, to
Yeah,
to
yeah.
to let those feelings come. But two kind of mindfulness exercises that it would fall under is the idea of leaves on a stream. And so you can visualize, this stream in front of you, and these emotions and these thoughts are just leaves, and you see them coming and you watch them go by. And that's all it is you have this acceptance and this presence with it, and it's just part, and they're going to go away. And
Mm,
then the other piece is riding the wave. And so for me, I can picture myself, in the turbulent water, and it's just letting that emotion come through and sitting and just feeling it and going, it's okay to feel it. I'm here. I can just ride it out, and knowing that it's going to pass,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm gonna come out the other end. And then originally, at the start, it could take a while to process that and to really connect with it. But eventually, I have the evidence that when I feel this emotion, it is going to pass. I'm going to come out, and that, okay, I give myself the space to do that and move on. But I think it's also important that sometimes you're not in a situation to process the emotion, and that's okay
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
It would not have helped me in the accident to go, okay, just ride out this wave of panic until it passes.
Yeah.
That's not reasonable, or it's not
Right.
reasonable to ride out the wave of anxiety when you're standing on the ice. So it's okay to, for me to go into that goalie mind and put those emotions away, just ground
Mm-hmm.
myself and stay level headed. But the important part is to go back when you are in a situation, in a safe space, to process those emotions and let them come up. And I think that's also something that, I still have to remind myself of.
I like that. I like that last part. I think you summarized it very, very well, and I hope this message could be shared to a lot of people who, well, I mean, touch wood, never like who have not run into a very bad situation, because this is when this become very useful. The last part where you say, I'm gonna kind of recap it because I think it's very important. One is when the situation happens, you have to kind of think about like, do you have the time to really like cope with it? If not, like use that goalie mind, use that logical mind to deal with that first, but make sure you do have the time to slow yourself down and not do anything and just sit down and think about what just happened and like let the emotionally flow. You don't have to ask yourself questions, just sit there and breathe, because that's what I do at least. Maybe there's some practical thing that you do during that moment when you're reflecting. Myself, I'm pretty self-aware of those kind of feeling, and when it comes to what happened to my mom, I thought like, because I saw that coming, like it's not a surprise to me. It's something that my family know is gonna happen. It's like cancer. So for a good time, but then I thought like, yeah, everybody expect. But when that really happens, that hit is still very much um, hit me a lot. And I don't speak to that a lot. I thought like, oh, my life is gonna be normal again, but not really. Like I have to accept the fact that it does affect it, how I think. It does affect it. It does affect it, the reality. Like my dad would no longer have a partner. Like I have to sink in that, and like these kind of things, it takes a little bit of a time to sink in, and you have to respect that feeling. You can't just push it away. That's what the biggest realization I had with all these tough situations I have had. And your body would tell you what to do. So listen to your body, listen to your mind. I think that's one thing I learned as well.
Yeah, and it's actually kind of interesting is I always pushed away these emotions, but the one emotion that I was always able to process quite well and in a relatively healthy way was grief.
Mm.
And grief around like death. I was always able to process death quite well. And I think part of that is just a acceptance of death, and that's just part of life. um, and that started, I think there's just been conversations around the reality of that in a very rational sense in my family since
Mm.
I was young.
Mm.
um, so when it's happened in my life, I can accept that fact. And it's horrible, it's emotional, it's upsetting and hard, but I don't feel so much that sense of out of control around those emotions. And so it's one of the few times where I can just let myself cry. I can be like, it's okay. Like this is what I'm supposed to feel,
Yes.
and be able to process that. But if I feel myself, on the verge of tears, I put that wall up, and it's like, no, we're not going there. I can see that kind of cliff of it, of those emotions, and I'll do this in therapy, is I can see 4 steps ahead that, okay, that's going to get me really emotional and I may cry, and I just divert. And it's taken time, even, still in therapy, it's like, okay, I see the cliff, I'm just acknowledging it, but we're still just gonna, we're gonna go the other way. But
Yeah.
it's there just so you're aware.
Yeah.
But I'm still not gonna go there. Yeah. But grief, it just, I can deal with it.
Oh man, you bring it to a very deep thing. Like I never thought about, like, when I when I were to go through that emotional journey, like I would see a cliff or whatever. One thing that I have been dealing with, it, I think it changed a very different philosophy, is I used to think, like, you gotta stay tough, man, like you don't want to show your soft side. It's bad, like, I don't know how that ingrained it into my brain, but ever since I let myself cry, like you said, ever since I let myself to be vulnerable and share these kind of stories, it actually calmed myself down a lot. And I realized that also, like, there's nothing wrong to share about this, and there's nobody's gonna judge you in any way, even when you share this, as long as you share this from the angle of it helping you, but at the same time help the person that you're sharing with, right? I think it's actually by sharing, actually showing another side of the strong side of us, or tough side of us. If we're not tough, we're probably not willing to share these kind of things. So I big kudos to you, like, just coming up to the show, sharing your story publicly. I think there's also a way for you to probably, run through that emotional journey again. Could be scary, but I think it's a great path that you had there to, re-imaging yourself to be a tough person.
Yeah, and I think it's, yeah, especially in this last year with the pandemic, is more people, are realizing that, we all have mental health, and I think the stigma around it has kind of kept people from talking about it, and people have been forced to confront that fact in this last year. And so the conversations that I've been having, that, my peers who have their own lived experience, and, I do quite a bit of advocacy work. So, my Facebook is quite positive. I see all these very honest posts and things from my friends and work they're doing. And in the last year, being able to see that spread more and beyond, just one day of Bell Let's Talk, and, everyone shares it and then everyone goes silent again for another year. Right. So seeing people be like, hey, we need to really actually be mindful of this. Workplaces, you need to be aware of burnout with your staff. You need to make these accommodations. So being able to have those conversations now, I think it's huge, and is something I'm hoping we can carry forward once kind of life goes back to, as normal as it will be, and figuring out ways that it doesn't mean you're weak or you're incapable because of your mental health. And Robin Leonard has been amazing as an advocate for goalies and mental health, for sure. And I think something really impactful that he said was, when he was out with the concussion, all these rumors going around, like, was he in rehab again? Had he relapsed? All these things. And he came back and he was like, normally, NHL teams, we don't talk about it if their player has a concussion. They keep most injuries, quite on the down low. But he was like, I felt like I had to come out and say this to, challenge all those rumors and give the answer. And he was like, he kind of felt offended, because, like, I've been open and honest. And I would think that you would respect that and know that if that happened, I would be honest again. But then he made a good point that you have players who have a history of ACL tears. You tear once, go, and they do it repeatedly, and yet teams still give them the chance. They let them get surgery, rehab, and come back. But, someone's like, oh, you went to treatment. Okay, it's almost like you get this one chance to have your mental health get to a point where you need support and you need treatment. And if you come back and you slip up and you need to take time away to rehab, then suddenly you're unstable or you're not reliable. But it's the same thing as someone with an unstable knee. And I had never really, put into words the way he did. And when I heard that, I was like, this is the mentality we really need, especially in the sports world, that it's an ongoing process and we need to be open and supportive to that. It doesn't mean you're weak if you need to go back for more intensive treatment or you need to change up your medications, whatever it is. It's just, mental health is health and we have to treat it the same way.
I think we talked a lot about kind of how we deal with our own mental health. I think this is very important for us as an individual, but I think what I opened up accidentally when I started the show is I never thought I would go deep into this topic and actually eventually become a platform where I can have someone to share these kind of things. I think I accidentally create a platform that make it open for people to share these kind of things. It's a very important initiative that I actually now I see the responsibility now. Before I don't have that, now I see the responsibility is how I and how everybody can be more open and be more supportive to actively talk about it. Like to ask your loved ones or ask somebody like, how do you feel about it? Like sharing that feelings, no matter you look tough or in front of people or not. Like I think this is very key. Before we don't have enough these kind of platform to share this openly, like you said, not just the bell, let's talk one day, like to share this, the whole year, right? And I want this could be one of the platforms that we can share this. So
yeah, I think it's so important. It's a hard conversation to have. Some of the mental health advocacy, I do mental health 101 talks in high schools because they're not getting that education.
Yeah.
So they don't know what those warning signs are. So going in and we're teaching this, but we're also realizing, even adults, they didn't get this. I didn't get a mental health education when I was in high school. Yeah. I only came to this on my own because I was struggling. And so I think it's so important that we're educating this young people, especially because it's such a hard time for youth. Suicide is the second leading cause of death behind accidents. So this is a serious issue with young people, especially. And I think of that in the sports world too, as often sports is your identity. And so if you have a teammate or someone, they get injured or something, that is a major impact. For me, when I was injured, that's what triggered the eating disorder, and that's what triggered some of the worst depressive episodes, was not being able to play my sport. And so it's really important that as a teammate, as a coach, as a parent, you can recognize those red flags and be able to see maybe they're missing classes, they're not wanting to go and train, they're missing practice, they're late. Even though they're not performing as well on the ice or in school. So it's all these little things that we really need to be educating people on and giving them some guidance, because asking someone if they're thinking of suicide or thinking of harming themselves isn't going to put the idea in their mind. But if we're not asking those questions, then that's when we lose people. And it's like, oh, I didn't even, they were so happy. What happened? And so it's so important that we talk about it. And it can be really hard to have those conversations. And one resource is bethere.org.
Yeah.
And it was developed by the charity jack.org, which is a youth-led mental health initiative across Canada. And you can just go to the website and it takes you through the 5 steps, or kind of we call it the 5 golden rules. And it just gives young people, especially, that confidence and a very clear way. You tell them what you see, you can be able to support them and connect them to the right resources. And so, it just take 5 minutes, go through, read the site, and be able to, try and do something for these young people so that we don't have the mental health crisis that we have right now. And, I'm at the University of Toronto, and we've had an ongoing crisis on our campus. And so all of these kind of resources, all of these conversations are literally life-changing and can help so that we don't have, one more death on campus. We don't lose another athlete. Yeah, I think that's something that I'm really passionate about. I've lost a couple friends and lost one quite recently. So, I think, the stigma that we have it needs to end.
Yeah.
And I'm quite grateful. I grew up in a family where it wasn't stigmatized and we talked about it. So I've been quite privileged in that sense.
Yeah.
But, I hear a lot of stories where, for whatever reason, it could be cultural or something, that you can't talk about it. Yes. And they suffer in silence for way too long.
Speaking of education of mental health, I do agree that that's a very important topic or important subject to talk about from the young. I never got any education in terms of how to deal with mental stuff. A lot of the things just come through experience, coming through kind of my own way of developing that. So I want to learn from you. What are some of the good conversation opener when it comes to talking about this topic? I think this would be something that is good when it comes to me talking to other people as well, right? Like what are some tips from, if you have me, what are some tips you would give me to start a conversation about it?
Like, I think it's really focusing on the non-judgmental aspect of it. It's and like, if I think about having a conversation with someone, you're not trying to fix someone, you're not trying to force someone to go through treatment or do something like that until they're ready. And so when you're having these conversations and maybe you see a teammate that's kind of struggling, is you just you approach them. It's like, this is what I've been seeing. You missed the last couple of games, you haven't showed up the last 2 weeks, or you haven't come for beers after the game. Is everything okay? And it's coming from non-judgmental, and it's just, this is what I'm seeing. And maybe they're like, oh yeah, I haven't been able to get a babysitter the last 2 weeks. Cool, great. That's all it is. But it opens the door. And even if they don't say anything in that moment, I had a teammate when I was going through, my worst depressive episode in second year, and she just sent me a Facebook message, was like, hey, you haven't been in class lately. And I was like, yeah, everything's fine. But it was, someone noticed. Someone saw me. And so it wasn't right away that I said anything, but after, she just was there, and there was no pressure or anything, that it was like, hey, yeah, not actually doing great. And, that's the approach. And it can be very hard, especially if, you're a parent and it's your kid, you want to fix them, you want to do something. But, that's not the way it's going to work, and it can backfire even. And someone gets even more defensive or hides things more. And so I think that's the biggest is going in non-judgmentally, and also realizing that you may not understand what they're going through. And so if they're saying something, you need to just believe them, because unless you've been through it, you could really not understand what depression is like.
Yeah. And
so it can be hard, and you just have to go, okay, this is what they're experiencing, and I'm just going to try and be here for them, and try and connect them to the right resources and support them in that process, because it can also be really hard to get support. You can try one resource, one treatment, and it really doesn't work. And that can be really disheartening as someone, where you finally have the courage to reach out.
Yeah.
And you're denied or whatever. And so having someone beside you who go, okay, that didn't work, but I'm going to help you reach out to the next person. So I think that's also really important.
I like that. I think one thing that I definitely get out of this all this conversation won't be able to happen before you actually have noticed somebody is not acting the way they used to be, right? If your friend never asked you, if they never realized that you were not in class for a couple of times, and they would never have that thoughts of like, oh, I'm going to reach out to Madeleine to ask her like, are you okay? So I think it's also a responsibility for us if we have caring ones or teammates or you know, people who we care about. They just don't like, just keep an open eye on like, are they acting the way they used to act, or something is different, right? And then you engage with a very open-minded conversation, and not, like you said, not having any assumptions. That's, I actually learned a lot from you and from a lot of I never directly speak with anyone who with a mental therapist, but like that's how I feel the most comfortable with when it comes to sharing. When you have someone who approach you in a way that like, hey, I'm here to listen. I'm here to help. Despite I might not know how to help you, but at least I'm willing to listen. I think this is very key. Yeah. Very
I
well
think
said.
it's really important that, as this education spreads more, people are realizing, something that may look like they were lazy. So maybe they keep showing up late to work, or they're not
Mm,
handing in their homework anymore in school. When I went through my first real depressive episode in grade 10, my marks dropped.
mm,
I was missing more classes and not getting, homework done the same. And I was just told by teachers, oh, you need to work harder. You need to get on
yeah.
top of things. And no one went, well, why is this happening? I was in honor roll grade 8, grade 9, and then suddenly it just dropped. And that was, I had an injury at the time that I was kind of hiding because I didn't want to miss more time playing. And that just kind of weighed on me. And no one said anything because it was just, oh, your grades aren't doing great, so you need to work harder. Um, and looking back, I'm like, oh, I was depressed at that time.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that we don't jump to conclusions. And it could be, a worker's, just doesn't, isn't motivated to be there just because they don't like it. And, that can happen, and you support them through that. But there could also be, that could just be a major red flag that something else is going on in their life. And I think it's important for people to kind of, not react right away and to ask those questions.
So what you bring up is a core difference is not only people acting differently, but maybe the way they perform, or some other indirectly reflect kind of maybe something is going on in their life, like results of your grade or stuff like that. Yeah, that is a very good point. Like, I think moving here to Vancouver, that's, I have the space to really start to understand my environment, and that's when I start to notify about this. And taking this extra time for us to think about, to reflect, think about the environment, see what's going on with your family members. Very, very crucial. I appreciate your share. One last question one last topic I want to quickly bring it up is, I saw that your Instagram, you have your dog as kind of your main character of your Instagram. I want to kind of understand how that has helped you mental health wise, and how you have having that relationship with him actually help you in terms of mental health.
Yeah. So Cody started as our family pet. And he came for a visit one summer in Toronto and ended up never going back.
Hmm.
Shortly after I had my accident. And when the PTSD really hit, I was spending a lot of time at home and around him. And, him being around helped. And I had a friend who was training their dog as a service dog for mental health reasons. And I was like, well, I can just, I needed something to do. I can train him on just kind of some of these tasks. And it was never meant to be that he would actually start working. It was, I'm around him, we can develop a bond, and maybe, he can help me out a little bit. And he just very quickly picked up on it. And I kind of went like, I'm able to function a lot more when kind of the PTSD and the flashbacks and dissociation were at the worst, or at their height. and he very much had the temperament to work, very calm, not reactive when he was out working. And so I kind of started to take it a little more seriously. And it was in about end of 2015 that, he really started coming out and working more with me. And it's been, it was the only reason I was able to go back to classes. So he will be able to alert me before. It would be like a flashback or an anxiety attack or something like that. And he just kind of was able, through training, to be able to pick that up before even I could.
Wow.
And so he'll let me know about that. And then in class, weighted blankets are a big thing now. And another thing is kind of weighted lap pads, which help, again, ground you in the moment. So before I would take anxiety meds in class, if it, I was starting to have that panic or something, but I would be quite clouded mentally from that. And so being able to use his weight to help ground instead meant that I wasn't having that side effect of the anxiety meds and was able to really actually stay present in lectures. And I haven't had too many issues with nightmares or anything like that, but when they have happened, he's been right there, and able to. So one thing is he'll come up and he'll start licking my face, and it's hard to be caught up in a flashback or an anxiety attack when there's this face and this tongue in your face. You're just like, don't get in my mouth, like, so your focus goes immediately to like, no, gosh, I gotta, in this moment. And so, that has just been amazing. And, I'm getting to a place now where it's more limited on where kind of I need him. So school is still kind of a big trigger and stuff around that. So he still helps me there, but I'm definitely at a place where, I'm more confident to be able to go, you can just chill and relax, and he's not having to work very much.
That is very interesting. I mean, we don't have time to cover more in depth on this side of things, but what I pick it up, I'm still amazed by how dog can be trained to pick up emotions from human, and they could like pick up signs and stuff like that. Like, we don't have to talk about it today, but I'm gonna leave a little cliffhanger for our guests. If they want to know more, let me know. Right? Well, I'll invite Madeleine again, and we can talk deeper on this. But I would never deny the fact that dogs are really the human's best friend. Like, this, I've heard so many stories about how doctors help someone's mental health in different ways, despite they're trained or not. But like, I love dogs. I never owned one, but I always wanted to, and I think I'm finally pulling a trigger very soon. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for those of you who are here right now listening. To close it off, I really encourage you guys to go to the bethere.org, right? Something that Madeleine actually mentioned that to us and to me. I went through the website a little bit. Very nicely designed website, but more importantly, very, very important message that they have in there. Some really good practical steps you can take to actually, help yourself and help others in terms of the mental health side of things. And definitely go check them out. Is there anything that they're actively doing right now? Do you know like that we can kind of talk about it?
So the organization jack.org that created and kind of runs the website, they've done now virtual Jack Talks. So something that they do is they would go into high schools. We have speakers across the country who go into high schools and kind of share that mental health education. And so they've been able to transition that to offer fully virtual mental health talks. So they've continued to run that across the country. And at different universities, they have Jack chapters. And so we still have events, at U of T, our Jack chapter has been running events, self-care events, educational events, and really help to provide some support kind of through this pandemic. And Jack.org also created a COVID-19 kind of resource to help with the mental health aspect of living through a global pandemic.
Very cool. Inviting speakers to high school, and what kind of topic do they talk? Is it just more of an education or more like a sharing sections? How do they organize it?
Yeah, it's a kind of I call it like a mental health 101 talk.
Ah,
And so we go through, the warning signs and different ways that we can take care of our own mental health.
hmm,
We cover the topics from bethere.org, and how can you speak up? How can you reach out to someone you think is struggling?
yeah,
And also, giving them some specific resources and connections within their school and within their specific community. And then also another big thing that jack.org does is they have an annual national Jack Summit, which is how I first started advocacy work, and it brings young people together from across the country to really
hmm,
work on ways that we can make change. So the last I attended in 2019, it was how do we make systemic change?
yeah,
Whether it's in your university or at a government level, is what do we do to make these policy changes to improve the situation and
nice,
challenge the stigma. And
nice.
they also run regional summits, or they run one in northern Canada, so they're really active across the country.
Very cool, very cool. I would definitely go deeper after this interview and actually understand a lot of. Maybe I'll have some question for you as well after this.
Okay.
Yeah, I start to gain a lot of the respect of people like yourself, like who have their own story and turn that into something that is inspiring to others. It's more importantly being that pioneer, being that force to like, hey, let's talk about it. I think that's what we need, especially in this time, is be proactive, be someone who are the leading force of this. And exactly that's how I started the Asian Goalie show as well. So I appreciate that you came in. For those of you who are tuning in, if you don't want to miss the show again, definitely click on the follow button, right? And I also have a Discord server that's called the Asian Goalie community. So if you have any questions, suggestions, if you want to interact with me alongside other goalies, go ahead and join that. I have a link right below. And next week, we'll continue on the topic of the mental game we all play as goalies on and off the ice. So thank you, Madeleine, for coming in. Those are really, really great message. I would love to have you back in the show in the future to talk more about mental health. Uh, but thank you for the precious 1 hour that you have with us.
Well, thank you for having these conversations and being a platform for this very important discussion.
Thank you.